Before we get to the Week 13 College Football Playoff Selection Committee's rankings, I wanted to revisit this conversation around conference championships and whether the sport should keep them or get rid of them. And really, I can make an argument either way, but I think we're all going to sort of come to the same conclusion. But the reason I want to talk about this is the conference championships, especially at the Big 12 ACC levels this year, but mostly every year for every conference champion or conference championship, I should say, can lead to a doomsday scenario. Like for Colorado, there's one in particular, and for that matter, BYU and Arizona State. But briefly, since we are here, conference championships are a relatively recent convention, right? 1992, the SEC had its first conference championship, and the MAC had its first in 1997. Conference USA had its first in 2005. The Big Ten didn't play a conference championship until 2011. That conference has been around since the 19th century. The Mountain West began its conference championship in 2013. And the American began its conference championship, though it's a relatively new conference, in 2015. Sun Belt in 2018. And the Big 12 in 2017. This is all in response to how we decide who gets to play for the national championship. As most years, I think your prediction is probably going to hit 50% of the time on who you think the conference champion is because you watch this show, which means that you are a diehard college football fan and you probably were born into college football and you've been born into your team. In doing that, you've also seen the evolution of the sport. You've seen us go from really the AP and the UPI picking a conference champion at the end, or excuse me, a national championship at the end of the season, right? Going back to split national championships or what we call shares of national championships, shares of conference titles. And this is also in response to playing more games, quite frankly. There is a contingent of college football fan now that forgets that we didn't always play 12 games. We started playing 12 games, matter of fact, in the 21st century, in 2006. And one of the reasons that we wanted to play more games is A, get more non-conference matchups that we would like to see across conferences, interconference rivalries being a thing, right? SEC teams versus Big Ten teams like Auburn versus Penn State here recently, or what used to be an out-of-conference game, Oregon versus Ohio State a couple years ago was the Pac-12 versus the Big Ten. Now it's just a Big Ten regular season game. And that's one of the other reasons why many are looking around going, do we need to be playing conference championships? I think there are several ways to look at this, right? The first one is, how would this affect the playoff, right? Because when we had the Bowl Alliance, we more or less got to pick who played in what bowl game, and then which team was going to be the national champion based on the outcomes of bowl games, right? So whatever was going on, the Rose Bowl or the Fiesta Bowl or Cotton Bowl, could affect the outcome of another based on what we think of how that team looks. The same thing is true in the BCS to some degree, right? We started using computers to try to identify who were the best teams in something like an objective measure. Turns out we didn't like that at all. We don't like objective measures when it comes to college football. And some people would say that's the sauce, right? The sauce being something that you don't need to leave in the comments and something that you could absolutely just go, this is the thing that I really want here. And that thing that we really want here is to be able to argue about it, right? We would like to be able to argue about whether or not Ohio State could beat Georgia or whether or not Texas could beat Ohio State, right? Or Oregon for that matter. And on we can go, right? But as we get closer and closer to this, and as I grow up watching college football on television like many of you, one of the things that I wanted is for the tournament to exist because it exists everywhere else. It exists in men's basketball, women's basketball, baseball, the NFL, NHL. Like, we use postseasons to determine champions in literally every other sport. And in some places, we give you double elimination. Like, one of my favorite events every year is the Women's College World Series, which, pits Oklahoma versus everybody. And Oklahoma has really been good in my lifetime. And it's been fun to watch Patty Gasso do her thing. So much so that she's got a statue out there at Love Field. Now, I think as we got into the college football playoff era, we come to find out that A, we don't really have enough spots for enough teams, or B, we have too many spots for not more than 2 or 3 teams. Like in recent years with the 14 playoff, you could probably identify 3 teams that needed to be there, right? 3 teams that positively earn the right to play for a national championship as we see it with our eyes. And then you'd have an also-ran like Oklahoma in some recent years or Cincinnati a couple of years ago. Just a program that didn't quite feel like it was in the same tier as those other three programs, or two in particular, right? Last year, I thought we're talking about Alabama, Michigan, and Texas, Washington. That worked out well for everybody. Even as Florida State went 13-0, and that's where we're back to, right? So last year, taking a look at what the 12-team playoff would have been before conference champions were crowned the weekend before, you could probably fit 7 teams into the playoff, just slot them. Whether they won or lost that game, as we would all believe that those are 12 of the best teams in college football. But as we got closer to that, that wasn't exactly true because Florida State got left out of the 14 playoff, but probably would have made the 12. And, well, I guess it would have been true because they would have made the 12 if they got left out of the 4. So in that way, Florida State would have been able to get in the college football playoff. And then I'm looking around at this year, and I'm asking myself, all right, which teams would most people believe? Like, where could we build a consensus on who needs to be in the college football playoff? And right now, I still think we got a couple of games left where we don't actually have to make that decision. But these rankings that are coming out tonight will indicate where we end up in that conversation. It's why I've been more or less raising the alarm around Colorado and what that program may or may not be. Now, you are right to believe that a Big 12 champion, Colorado or BYU or Arizona State, gets into the playoff. You are wrong to believe that it is just going to be one of the 4 highest ranked conference champions, and that is the criteria. Be very clear about this. It is not the crowned champion of a Power 4 conference that gets one of those byes. You get into the playoff as one of those teams in one of those 4 power conferences because we believe that one of those 4, or all of those 4, I should say, power conferences are going to produce at least one team that is going to get into the 12-team format. Now, it's up to the committee to rank them. And how they rank them is how we're going to determine the byes. So if the Big Ten is the highest ranked conference champion, they'll get the number 1 seed. If Colorado is the 5th highest ranked conference champion, they will not get one of the top 4 seeds. They will just be one of the 5 teams, one of the teams that gets into the 12-team playoff. And they might be the 5 seed, right? They might be. I've often thought that the 5 seed is the best spot in the house. I realize there are some people that want the bye, but if you got to play a conference championship and you're either playing for a first-round bye or to get left out of the conference championship, that doesn't quite seem fair. Like, the stakes on that are just out kilter. They're out of whack, right? So if you're Colorado and you get to the college football, you get to the Big 12 championship, and let's say you lose by a point to BYU or Arizona State, who also had fantastic seasons, you can get left out of this thing after winning 10 games, right? Suffering 3 losses and having one of the more compelling programs in the sport that everybody would like to see play, to the point that people would say money. And that's one of the reasons why we kind of want to keep the conference championships going. First, we like the extra game if we're players, if we're fans, not necessarily if we're players, but they play 17 games in the NFL, and we're as professional now as they are, given name, image, and likeness. And frankly, there are high school brackets that play more games than college football had been playing for years. I mean, the Texas high school football playoffs began like now, and they go through January. They've consistently done that. Same thing is true with FCS below us. They got 24 teams in their playoff, right? Like, it's pretty outstanding. Be a top 25 team, you're basically going to get into that thing. And then we get to have a for real playoff. So the sport becomes about its postseason. And I don't know that college football has been about its regular season in quite some time, even as people want to talk about what individual games mean. There are some games that mean more than others, and there are some games that just don't matter, and sometimes that's not really something you can point to. Like Ohio State, Indiana absolutely matters this year. Start of the season, we would have told you it didn't. We would have told you Ohio State, Michigan would be the game that matters the most going into these last couple of weeks, and that's not true. But you get the extra game, and then you get to raise a banner, which I always enjoy. I love being able to raise a banner. That's a banner behind me, right? It's 100,000 subscribers. There are lots of people with 100,000 subscriber plaques. There are lots of people with million subscriber plaques, and there are a few people with 10 million subscriber plaques. I personally think that we should all get one every 100,000 subscribers because it's been that difficult for some of us to achieve. And that's what you want to honor, right? You want to honor if Indiana were to win the Big Ten championship, you want to give them the banner. But the thing is, do they want to share it? No, I don't think anybody wants to share any title ever. And if you didn't play for a Big Ten championship, they would share their conference title with Oregon if they're undefeated, right? Or if you're a one-loss team, but you got the head-to-head, you're probably going to get the de facto conference championship. And it really doesn't matter in as far as who gets in the playoff if we're talking about 12 best teams. But since we made the criteria conference champions, that's why we're still doing it. Another reason is that conference championship games are really good for business. Like, dead ass. The SEC championship game was created in part to satisfy a need for television inventory. And according to Ross Dellinger at Yahoo Sports, who wrote a really good piece about this last year, the television value for a Big Ten championship or an SEC championship alone is worth about $40 million. And a Big 12 championship is around $25 to $30 million. And I think that number went up with the dissolution of the Pac-12, right? So I don't know that we're going to get rid of conference championships because they're baked into so much of how we pay for the sport and how we pay out the sport. And people love to make money, and that's in part what putting the games on television is for. It is to make money. If you can make more money, you do. And I think that has led to the expansion of the playoff from 4 teams to 12 teams. I would even say it's gone from the Bowl Alliance to the BCS to the 4-team to the 12-team because there is still an appetite for this, and it's a live sporting event. And the more live sporting events that you can put on that people care about, the more you want to do that, right? That's the reason why so much live television is built around sports, and sports pays for so much of the scripted television that we like watching. I submit to you, there is a direct correlation between the NFL's being on CBS and Paramount being able to make our favorite Taylor Sheridan shows for a lot of money, like Yellowstone. Landman is very good. I'm from Oklahoma, so that's going to have me. Plus, Christian Wallace is one of the great writers from Texas walking the face of the earth, and he's awesome. You also get Lioness. You also get Tulsa King. All these other shows that people like, right? It helps pay for those things. And then a Super Bowl, my goodness, man. A Super Bowl is probably the most important event in American sports, right? Like, I think that we care more about the Super Bowl than we do the World Cup, dog, than we do most Olympic sports. Like, we like to watch Olympic sports, but we need to watch the Super Bowl. And it shows in that advertisers not only pay an arm and a leg for those slots, but they get really creative with their best possible ad campaigns, which turns it into a much cooler viewing experience for all of us. I think that is where we're headed with college football, or at least that's where I hope we're headed. But the doomsday scenario would be Colorado being either A, left out of the college football playoff, even if, they play in the conference championship. And I'm looking at this and I'm asking, like, for real, if we eliminated conference championships, would we be able to trust this committee to select teams like those from the Big 12 rather than fill the league with, say, 6 teams from the SEC and 6 teams from the Big 10? I'm not sure, right? We'd have to look at schedules, and we'd have to look at players. We have to look at, branding. But when you get into the calculus that is, frankly, passionless and about making money and about television ratings, there are a lot of people that are going to get upset about that. However, you do want to watch Ohio State, Texas, or Oregon, Texas, or Alabama, Georgia, more than you want to watch Boise State and Army. I don't think that's shade. I hope it's not. I think it's just reality. But it is something I want to put in front of you as we continue to talk about this thing, because I think conference championships came into vogue because we needed them and they made money. And as we're changing the sport and more people added conference champions so they could get teams qualified for the college football playoff, now that you don't need them, we might see them go away. The number of plays that are being played, the number of games being played, the way that the schedule is just compacted in the month of December now with the end of the end of the season, with signing day, with transfer portal open and closing, and then we're playing football, like meaningful playoff football, December 20th. There's just a lot here. So I'll be curious to find out what, if anything, changes when they open up these negotiations again, maybe add more teams, get to 16 after 2026. But more than that, I think it's just going to come down to who gets to make more money. And as much as that kind of sucks, that's where we are with this sport.